Billionaire Mafia boss said, "Translate this if you can." Waitress replied in French and revealed who she really was. Have you ever stood in a room so rich it made you feel invisible? The kind where chandeliers shimmer like frozen stars and everyone talks too loudly because silence feels poor. That was the Golden Ember on Saturday night, the most expensive restaurant in the city, and the place where people like Victor Moreau like to show off their power. Victor sat at the center of the grand table, his suit cut to perfection, his gold cufflinks catching every drop of light. Around him sat politicians, tech billionaires, and socialites who spoke in laughter that sounded rehearsed. The kind of people who clapped too quickly and smiled too wide. His guests adored him, not for who he was, but for what he owned: ships, towers, influence, and fear. To everyone else, Victor was the definition of success. To those who knew him in secret, he was something darker. But no one dared to mention that. Not in a place like this. The waitstaff moved quietly through the hall, dressed in crisp uniforms, eyes down, voices low. They knew better than to interrupt the conversations of the powerful. Among them was Ilara, moving between tables with a calm precision that came from experience. She had the grace of someone who'd worked hard to blend in. Too calm, too collected, almost invisible. Her eyes, though, told a different story. They weren't the tired eyes of someone serving for a living. They were observant, focused, like someone waiting for a signal only she could hear. Victor noticed her when a single drop of red wine from a guest's glass splashed near his sleeve. He looked down, then up, slowly, deliberately, until his cold blue eyes met hers. "You should be more careful," he said, his tone sharp, but wrapped in a smile meant for the crowd. "This bottle costs more than she earns in a month." Laughter rippled around the table. Expensive laughter. Ilara froze for just a second, then straightened the bottle, wiped the tablecloth, and stepped back. Her voice was steady. "My apologies, sir." Victor tilted his head. "Do you know what this wine is, miss?" She didn't answer. "It's a 1982 Chateau Mouton Rothschild," he continued, swirling his glass. "A legend in a bottle. And legends don't come cheap." The guests chuckled again. Ilara simply nodded, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Victor studied her, maybe curious, maybe just bored. She didn't look away, but she didn't challenge him either. That quiet confidence unsettled him more than he'd admit. "Don't worry," he said finally, dismissing her with a wave. "You'll learn. Everyone does." Ilara gave a polite smile and walked away. But as she turned, her eyes flickered toward him. Not with fear, not with shame, but with recognition. An hour passed. The restaurant pulsed with warm music and clinking glasses. Victor, half drunk on his own importance, leaned back in his chair. "Let's make things fun tonight," he announced, voice booming across the dining room. "I have something special." He reached for a frame resting beside him, an old yellowed menu under glass. The guests leaned in with curiosity. "This," he said proudly, "is a relic. A menu written by one of the greatest European chefs I ever worked with, a genius from Paris. It's from the night my first restaurant opened." Applause filled the air. Victor enjoyed it like oxygen. He turned the frame around so the faded French text faced the room. "It's all written in his original hand," he said, tapping the glass. "I keep it as a reminder that class isn't bought. It's inherited." The comment hung heavy. Some of the guests laughed again, unsure if they should. Victor's gaze swept over the waitstaff. "Let's see," he said with mock playfulness. "Does anyone here actually speak French? Or are we all pretending tonight?" A woman in a silver gown, one of Victor's guests, smirked and pointed toward the nearest waitress. "You there?" she called. "You should try. You probably serve French food all the time." Victor's grin widened. "Excellent idea." "Let's see what the new waitress can do." All eyes turned toward Ilara. For a moment, the only sound was the soft crackle of the candles. She stood frozen near the table, holding a tray, unsure if it was a real command or another rich man's joke. Then she stepped closer, her shoes quiet on the marble floor. Victor leaned back, resting his arm along the chair. "Come on," he said smoothly. "Show us what you've got. Read it aloud." Ilara's eyes moved across the faded script behind the glass. It wasn't easy to read. Time had worn the ink to faint brown traces. But something in her face changed as she stared at it. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition, Victor noticed and smirked. "Don't tell me you actually understand it." A few guests laughed. "She's probably trying to remember what Google Translate says." one man joked. Alara looked up, calm and composed. Do you want me to translate it? Victor chuckled, raising his glass. If you can. The laughter that followed was full of arrogance, the kind that assumes the ending before the story even begins. But when Alara opened her mouth, everything changed. Her voice was soft but clear, steady like a tide. She spoke in French perfectly, each word rolling effortlessly, the accent flawless. Her pronunciation was so natural it made the room go silent. The laughter died out mid-breath. When she finished, she switched back to English, her eyes never leaving Victor's. It says, power hides behind a smile, but the truth always finds a way to speak. The words landed like a quiet strike. Victor's smile faltered. For the first time that night, the mask slipped. That's not what it says, he muttered, his voice lower, colder. Alara didn't blink. No, Victor, she said softly. That's exactly what it says. You would know. You wrote it once. The air froze. You could hear glasses clink as someone set one down too hard. The woman in the silver dress frowned, confused. What does she mean, Victor? Victor forced a smirk. I have no idea. The girl's mistaken. Probably read it wrong. He chuckled nervously. She's just... But Alara didn't let him finish. She took a step forward, her voice still quiet but carrying across the room. You remember that old warehouse outside the city? The one that burned years ago? A couple of guests looked at each other. Victor's hand twitched around his glass. I think you do, she said. Because that's where it all started, isn't it? Victor pushed back his chair slightly, his face tightening. Enough, he said sharply. You're out of line. But Alara didn't stop. Her eyes locked on his like a memory refusing to fade. You told your men to erase everything that night. But you missed one thing, the crowd murmured, confused, uneasy. The phone started to lift, cameras ready. Victor stood now, the authority in his stance flickering between fear and anger. You don't know what you're talking about. Alara's voice was steady, cutting through the noise. I know exactly what I'm talking about. And just like that, the tension broke open. The invisible boundary between the powerful and the powerless collapsing in a heartbeat. A waiter froze in the doorway. Guests exchanged glances. Someone whispered, Is this real? Victor forced a laugh, desperate to regain control. She's lying, he said, gesturing around the table. You see? This is what happens when you let just anyone work here. I'll have her fired. Alara raised a hand, quiet but commanding. You already did that once, she said. Only that time you called it cleaning up a mistake. The sound in the room died completely. The pianist had stopped playing without even realizing it. Every pair of eyes turned toward her. Victor's expression hardened. Who are you? Alara hesitated. Her voice softened, almost trembling now. Someone you thought was dead. Victor's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as something like recognition flickered, faint but real. You're making a mistake, he said, his tone dropping. Whatever you think you know. Alara shook her head slowly. I don't think, Victor. I remember. Her words hit him harder than a shout. A few guests whispered again, their curiosity turning into unease. Someone's phone camera light blinked on. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're playing a dangerous game, girl. Alara met his gaze, unwavering. No, she said. I'm ending one. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The air itself felt charged, every breath heavy with the feeling that something irreversible had just begun. And that's when the first camera flash went off. Victor turned his head sharply toward the light. But when he looked back, Alara was still standing there, calm, composed, unafraid. Her hands were steady. Her voice, even softer now, carried a quiet finality. You built everything on lies, Victor, she said. But tonight, it's all coming down. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Too afraid to move, too curious to look away. And Victor, the man who once controlled every room he entered, could only stare back, speechless, as the truth he'd buried began to dig itself out. Alara's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. She could feel years of silence pressing against her throat, threatening to break it all open. He had no idea who he was talking to. Not yet, but he would soon, because everything, his smile, his empire, his carefully crafted life, was about to fall apart, starting right there, in front of his dinner guests and the world watching through their phones, and all she had to do was speak. Victor's jaw tightened as he realized what was happening. The world that once worshipped him was about to witness something he couldn't control. He forced a smile, the kind that used to silence boardrooms. "Everyone, please," he said, spreading his arms. "Let's not ruin the evening over some truth." Alara interrupted softly. "You mean that thing you've been running from since the fire?" The guests exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "What fire?" Victor's voice hardened. "Enough." Security. But no one moved. Even the guards near the entrance hesitated, watching, waiting to see where this was going. Alara's hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "You killed my family there, Victor. You ordered your men to burn everything. My parents, my brother. You wanted no witnesses. But you missed one." The words dropped like stones in water, spreading, rippling, pulling the whole room under with them. A woman at the table gasped. One of the guests dropped his fork, the clatter echoing in the stunned quiet. Victor shot up from his chair, his face red, his voice booming. "She's lying."
"This is insane."
But Alara reached into her pocket. Her hand shook slightly as she pulled out a small, burnt photograph. Edges blackened, colors faded. She held it up for the cameras and the crowd to see. The picture showed a family of 4 standing in front of a modest house. A man with a mustache, a woman holding a little girl, and a boy clutching a toy airplane. Alara's voice broke as she spoke. "Do you recognize them?" she asked, her eyes locked on Victor. "You called it business. I called it murder." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. Everyone could feel it, like standing too close to lightning. Victor's breath quickened. He turned to his guests. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "She's making it up." "I don't even know these people." But the look in his eyes said otherwise. Alara placed the photo gently on the table in front of him. "You knew exactly who they were," she whispered. "Because you gave the order yourself." Gasps erupted again. Someone stood up, backing away from the table. Others started recording openly now. The room that once worshipped Victor's every word had turned into a courtroom, and Alara was the one holding the evidence. Victor's hands shook as he tried to speak. "You have no proof," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. Alara's eyes glistened with tears. "I have enough," she said. "And now everyone watching will too." Phones flashed. Cameras clicked. In the span of seconds, the entire world outside the Golden Ember began to awaken. Tweets, live streams, and whispers spreading like wildfire. Victor's oldest ally, a gray-haired investor sitting 2 seats away, leaned toward him in disbelief. "Victor," he whispered, "is this true?" Victor turned on him, furious. "Don't you dare," he hissed. "You've known me for 20 years. The man pulled back. "And in all those years," he said softly, "I've never seen you look scared until now." Victor's face twisted with rage. He slammed his fist against the table. "You think this waitress can destroy me?" But Alara stood her ground. "You already destroyed yourself," she said quietly. "You just don't know it yet." The room buzzed with murmurs, phones held high, flashes lighting up Victor's face like a police spotlight. The staff had stopped moving. Even the chef stood at the edge of the kitchen, arms folded, watching history unfold. "Turn those cameras off," Victor shouted. "Now!" No one did. He reached for Alara's arm, but before he could touch her, she stepped back. "Don't," she said, her voice sharp and cold. "You did enough with those hands already." Her words hit like a slap. Victor froze. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. The manager finally stepped forward, nervous, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Sir, please, maybe we should move this outside." Victor glared at him. "You'll be out of a job if you don't—" "Actually," Alara said, cutting him off, "he'll have plenty of job offers by tomorrow. You, on the other hand—" She let the words hang, deliberate. The cameras captured everything, her calm, his fury, the slow unraveling of a man who'd spent a lifetime building a mask. Victor's voice cracked as he tried to laugh. "You think the police care about stories? You think they'll take the word of a waitress?" Alara nodded slowly. "They might not need to. You see, I already sent them what they needed." Victor blinked. "What?" "Every name, every deal, every document you thought you burned." The color drained from his face. "You're bluffing," he whispered. Alara tilted her head, almost pitying him. "Try me." The guests looked around uneasily, realizing they weren't just at a dinner anymore. They were witnessing the collapse of an empire. Victor turned toward the entrance as if calculating an escape. But before he could move, the sound of police sirens drifted faintly through the night air outside. Every head turned. Ilara's eyes didn't leave his face. "They're not here for me," she said. Victor's breath came faster now. His power, his control, his certainty, all of it slipped away in a few seconds. "You ruined me," he whispered. Ilara stepped closer, her eyes filled not with triumph, but grief. "No," she said softly. "You did that when you lit the fire." Outside, flashing red and blue lights painted the restaurant's glass walls. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. Reporters had already gathered outside, their microphones and cameras pressed against the doors. Inside, the guests began to move away from Victor, quietly, cautiously, as though standing too close might make them guilty too. A woman muttered, "I can't believe this." Another said, "I thought he was untouchable." Victor sank back into his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. "You don't understand," he muttered to no one in particular. "They were traitors. They were—" But Ilara's voice cut through him. "They were my family." He looked up at her then, really looked. For the first time, he saw not a waitress, not a stranger, but the little girl from that photograph. The one who'd been standing beside her brother, smiling, unaware that her world was about to burn. Recognition dawned. His lips parted, but no sound came. "It's you," he whispered. Ilara nodded. "Yes, Victor. It's me." The cameras caught the moment, the flicker of realization, the collapse of denial. She placed the photograph back in her pocket, her eyes wet but steady. "You took everything from me," she said, "and now you'll finally answer for it." Victor's hands gripped the tablecloth until his knuckles turned white. "You think they'll believe you?" "They already do," she replied, and outside, as if on cue, the heavy doors burst open. Law enforcement officers entered, their footsteps sharp, their movements precise. "Victor Moreau," one of them announced. "You're under arrest." The restaurant erupted in noise, gasps, shouts, the whir of cameras. Victor's bodyguards hesitated before stepping aside. They knew better than to fight this. Ilara stood motionless as the officers surrounded him. Victor turned to her one last time. "You don't know what you've started," he growled. "You'll never be safe." Ilara met his eyes calmly. "I stopped being safe a long time ago." The officers led him toward the door, handcuffs glinting under the chandeliers. As he passed the line of tables, the guests turned their faces away. No one reached out to help him. No one spoke his name. For a man who once owned everything, that silence was worse than any sentence. The night outside the Golden Ember was chaos, flashing lights, shouting reporters, and the dull roar of disbelief spreading through the crowd. Ilara stepped outside, her apron still on, her hands shaking slightly. The air was cold, carrying the faint scent of rain. A young journalist approached her cautiously. "Miss, are you the woman in the video?" Ilara didn't answer. She just looked at the crowd, the cameras, the storm of attention forming around her. For years she had dreamed of justice, but standing there she didn't feel victorious. She felt empty, because nothing could bring her family back. Inside, through the glass, she could see Victor being pushed into a waiting police car. His head hung low, his arrogance gone. The flash of cameras followed him like vultures circling a fallen king. Ilara turned away. She didn't need to see more. As she walked down the marble steps, someone in the crowd shouted her name. Her real one, the name that had been buried with the ashes of that night. She froze for a second, then kept walking. Behind her, reporters called out, "Who are you really? How did you find him? Are you afraid he'll come after you?" But she didn't answer any of them, because the real story hadn't begun tonight. It had started years ago, with fire, screams, and a promise whispered through smoke. And while the world finally saw the billionaire's fall, no one yet knew what she'd lost to make it happen, or how far she'd gone to bring him down. Her secret was still safe. For now, morning came like a quiet storm. News channels flooded every screen with Victor Moreau's downfall. Helicopters circled his mansion. Officers carried out boxes of evidence. And every network repeated the same clip, Ilara standing tall in her waitress uniform, her voice trembling yet unshaken as she exposed the man the world once worshipped. Within 24 hours, his empire collapsed. Stocks crashed, Partners vanished, and those who once called him friend now denied ever knowing him. Ilara watched it all from a small motel room on the city's edge. The television flickered, showing her face over and over. "The waitress who brought down a king," the headline said. But she didn't feel like a hero. Her hands still shook, her chest tight with memories of fire, screaming, and smoke. Justice had come, but it felt empty. Nothing could bring her family back. A knock came at the door. It was Detective Nora Green, the same officer who once closed her case for lack of evidence. She looked older now, tired. "You did what we couldn't," Nora said quietly. "We can protect you now. New identity, new start." Ilara smiled faintly. "Peace doesn't come with a new name," she replied. "It comes when he's truly gone." Days later, the news changed again. Victor Moreau had vanished during a transfer between facilities. Some said his men rescued him. Others said he bribed his way out. No one knew for sure. But Ilara did. Men like him didn't run. They regrouped. She returned to the Golden Ember after a week. The restaurant was closed, its lights dark, its golden letters removed from the facade. A for sale sign hung crookedly on the door. She stood there for a long time, her reflection faint in the glass. In her pocket was the same burnt photograph, the edges softer now from being held too often. She looked at it one last time. Her brother's smile. Her parents' eyes. "I did it," she whispered. "It's over." The wind lifted her hair, carrying her words into the empty street. She placed the photo gently against the door, tucking it between the frame and the glass, a memorial for those who'd never gotten one. Then she turned and walked away. A car slowed beside her at the curb, a dark sedan, windows tinted. It rolled forward, paused, then disappeared around the corner. Ilara didn't look back. She had expected shadows to follow her forever. That was the price of truth. That night the rain came again. Ilara sat by the motel window, the small TV flickering quietly. A newscaster's voice spoke over the sound of thunder. "Interpol confirms Victor Moreau has been sighted in southern Europe. Officials believe he's attempting to rebuild his network under a false identity." Ilara smiled faintly. It wasn't joy. It was recognition. The story wasn't over. She reached for her coat, pulled out a small silver locket, and opened it. Inside was the photograph again, smaller now, trimmed to fit. She kissed it once and whispered, "For you." Then she closed the locket and stood up. Outside, the rain blurred the neon lights. Her footsteps echoed as she walked away from the motel, vanishing into the night. No one knew where she was going. But somewhere, far from cameras and crowds, a woman who had once been a waitress and once been a child in the fire was preparing to finish what she started. And the world, still obsessed with the story of a billionaire's fall, had no idea the real reckoning had just begun. Weeks later, the Golden Ember reopened under new ownership. No one knew the woman who left a photo there. But every night, the last table by the window sat empty, as if waiting for her, and sometimes when the lights hit the glass just right, you could almost see her reflection, calm, watchful, and unafraid, because Ilara hadn't disappeared. She had simply stepped into the quiet part of her story, the part where justice becomes memory, and truth finally learns how to breathe. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life.